What's going on, everybody? This is Impendingduff, and today I'm going to show you how I got this Mars kind of influenced base going on. It is a resin base, but there are many elements that went into this bad boy to give it that realistic kind of Martian red earth, if you will, coloring. I'll show you how I get it. We'll break it down here. I just want to point out that there are multiple layers to this, so gonna be a little bit of a in-depth dive into this one. So starting out with an Elrik's Hobbies resin base. This is from their slate line. I believe this is a 40 milliliter. Why do I always struggle with that? Anyway, let's get started. The Nekron Overlord that I've been painting up, that's what's going to go on this. I've already pre-painted this little rock influence that's part of the model itself. He is pretty much 98% done. Here's a look of what he's going to kind of look like on the base. Most important thing, resin. I don't care if it's a kit or a base, you gotta wash it. So just a little bit of your garden variety Dawn dish soap in a little to-go cup that I saved after a pizza night, some warm water, and a junky toothbrush. Mix that up, get it nice and soapy. Drop the base in the water, kind of stir it around a little bit, fiddle with it. It's not really necessary, but for some reason I felt it was. But you want to make sure you scrub every little nook and cranny of this base, okay? You don't want to leave any surface unclean. The reason is there's mold release on resin, and it'll cause your paint to chip. You don't want that. Give it a little rinse. There's really no rhyme or reason behind this other than just cleaning off the soap. Make sure you dry it really well. You can run it under the sink. I'm just lazy. I didn't get up and I got this giant ass wash bottle, so dry it off real nice here. I get the paper towel in the little nooks and crannies, but then I put it by a fan. If you got a blow dryer, you can blow dry it, or you can just leave it for 20 minutes. Of course, basing. I use my Badger Renegade Krome. A 0.5 needle in there for all priming and base coating needs. This thing is killer. Stynylrez Brown. Yes, Stynylrez comes in colors, kids. Lots of them. Buy them. Use them. Brown is great for this red earth. So I'm going to fill the cup here. No dilution needed whatsoever. Just kind of fill it up into the cup and spray it right out. And give it a good even coat. I seem to have been struggling with my brush a little bit. It's because I hadn't cleaned it in like a week. Don't be like me. Clean your brush regularly. Speed it up here and just show you. It's a nice even coat. This was after I decided to screw this and clean the nozzle out. But there you go. Give it a nice even coat with the Stynylrez. You can use whatever brown primer you feel is necessary. It can be a rattle can. But make sure you get a good even coat. And there it is. Nothing special, just a nice, even mid-tone brown. Alright, so this is where we're going to start picking out some details. This is Scale 75's Intensity Brown. This brown is deep. It's almost like a black. It comes in the Intensity 2 set. You can get this at Michigan Toy Soldier. I'll leave a link in the description. I've got a discount code and everything. It's a great ink set. I just kind of spray it onto the paper towel here so you can see the tone that I'm working with. Now, the key is I'm not going to be really spraying this too much top down. I'm only picking out all of these little cracks and crevices within the base here. I'm not really trying to spray too much on the top surface, but then, of course, I do it here a little bit. And that's because I want to start influencing some shadow from where the miniature is going to be sitting. Picking out some of these little details. You see that crack kind of coming out there. That'll all pop. You know, I'm going to cover most of this up later. But it's going to start to influence that shadow that I want to imply because the miniature is going to be covering that portion. But the main point is to make sure you stick to the cracks. Of course, as always here, I use Acryl predominantly. I'm going to start off with a base coat of mahogany. Going to thin it about 1:1, 2:1. With a little flow improver. I don't know why this takes me forever to drip this damn paint in the cup, but it does. Gives me an extra moment to talk. So I'm pretty much doing a almost top-down spray on this because I don't want to lose all of that dark brown ink that I just poured into all the very deep cracks and shadows of this base under those layers of slate. So I'm giving it a nice, even, thin, transparent coat. I can still see that shadow from the ink on top, and I'm not hitting any of the underside of it, just the very top. Now we're going to start getting into the oranges and reds. Burnt orange from Acryl, one of my favorite colors of all time. I'm not an orange guy, but I love their burnt line. Again, I'm going to spray it top down super thin, but notice I'm kind of keeping the brush at like 15-20 degree angle, pointing outward from the center of the base. That way I'm kind of overspraying onto the little nooks and crannies, and the cracks are still staying really deep, brown, dark, you know. You don't want to sit there and do a top down because you're going to lose a bunch of your shadows. It's all about keeping those shadows popping. I'm going to spray top down on the top here. You're going to say, Duff, you just covered all that shadow you were just talking about building on top. It's there slightly. For some reason I couldn't pick it up with the camera. However, don't worry. We're going to come back later. We're going to do some pigment work to bring that up more. So just keep spraying really thin. Keep it smooth. Keep it simple. These colors aren't necessarily going to be the predominant popping colors. We'll do some layering. We'll do some other techniques to really get things to pop. Once that dries solid, grab yourself some soft tone. I'm going to mix it about 1:1 here. Nothing fancy, just thinning it down a little bit so it can flow into those cracks and crevassiers. Mixy. Now, when I start applying this, I'm going to start applying it to the sand on the base. The sand on the base is not going to stay red. I'm going to keep it more of a brown influence. I'm just going to kind of like dab it in there because it's really textured. I'm not slathering it. I'm not painting it because I don't want to remove any paint that's on the base. I'm just dabbing it. If you let your paint cure overnight, you should be just fine. But this only dried for about 20 minutes because I'm impatient. And that's perfectly fine too. Just make sure that on heavily textured surfaces like this, you're dabbing it on instead of brushing it on. This is all going to be shadow. It's all going to be dusty brown later. So I'm not too worried about the tops. But I do want it to get into all those different details. Now we're going to worry about the tops of the slate, all the different deep cracks and whatnot. This is actually cured quite a bit, but I'm still going to dab it on here just because I'm kind of giving it a little bit of a mottled texture. Just keep dabbing it on, get it in, concentrate on all the different tiny little minute cracks. You'll be able to see here in this shot, there are actually quite a lot of detailed dips in that base. Now I'm going to move on to some dry brushing. We've got Astaroth Red and Verminlord Hide from Citadel. I'm going to mix these about 1 part of the Astaroth Red to about 3 parts of the Verminlord. This isn't going to be the end game. I'm actually going to add 2 or 3 other colors. I've got Goldfang Brown, and I believe Ryza Rust gets in there. We'll wait here. But I started mixing the colors. Yeah, it's Ryza Rust. I started mixing colors. I wasn't too happy with it. It wasn't giving me the colors I wanted, so keep mixing. Now, here is the big secret. I use these brushes. Let me just put it to you this way. There is a company out there that charges a premium for a brush just like this. Don't pay for that brush. This is a $1 makeup brush you can get at Meijer, Walmart, Target. It's called E.L.F, and this is a blending eye brush. It's perfect for dry brushing without spending $20 on some bullcrap premium brush. So I load up the brush here, and the idea is to remove a lot of the pigment. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm going to be able to rattle off a ratio, but you can see here there's still pigment on the brush. Now the key is to flick it back and forth. Don't go in circles. Stay in one direction and follow that texture. Notice I'm kind of picking the direction that the sharp edges intersect the direction of my brush strokes. I move it here and there, but that's just so I can hit specific peaks and whatnot details. But get your first coat on there. Start working on the edges. But don't get into your shadows. We don't want to break those shadows up with any highlight. This is going to simulate light hitting this stone. It's really going to help with selling the shadows in this piece by dry brushing these layers and staying away from the deeper crevices that you built up that shadow with the brown ink. So that's the first layer there. You start to see that Mars tone starting to peek out. I'm just kind of going back. I look it over. I say, okay, I need a little bit more here. There's definitely light hitting this surface, so I need to bring that up just a little bit. So just keep working it until you're satisfied with it. There's no right or wrong here. Just make sure that you're satisfied with it. And this is going to be the first layer of dry brushing. And there it is. It's looking pretty Marsy as it is, but we can take it another step. I'm going to take that same amount of paint and go back to my Rise of Rust here. And again, this is Citadel dry paints. Fucking cats. Reach in there, grab yourself a dollop, and mix it into about 2 parts Rise of Rust to 1 part that mix that you just made. There it is. It's kind of a off brickish orange. Now I'm going to go even lighter than the first coat. I took a lot more paint off, and I'm just barely flicking it. You can see I'm not really going as aggressive as the first layer. The first layer was more or less a base coat dry brush, where this is really picking out those edge details. Just keep working it. Move it around as you see fit, where you think the color needs to be the most intense. Like I said, there's no right or wrong. Just keep working the pigment on there, staying out of the shadows. 100% stay out of the shadows. There it is. It's looking pretty sharp. It's popping. You could probably leave it there if you wanted, but I'm not stopping there. Adding even more Rise of Rust to that well that I just mixed in. It's not quite pure Rise of Rust. It's got a little bit of that brown and a little bit of that red still in there. And I'm taking off a ton of that paint. It's barely on there. This is solely to pick out the finest of sharp details. Flick it back and forth. Only hit those edges. I'm not really going across the top surface of the slate too hard. I dust it. I barely dust it. But I'm more focusing on these sharper points. The secondary shelves. The really sharp points of this piece. And again, just keep moving it around. You'll see where you need it. Stay away from where the shadowing from the figure is going to be. This is the reason I don't attach the figure until I start doing the dry pigmenting, because I want to be able to work on this base freely without that miniature kind of getting in the way, if you will. You can see some of those angles where the shelf is still in shadow. I'm not going under that point there to really get any highlights. Just kind of working around as I see fit here. Alright, now I'm going to go to a dry brush of straight Gold Fang Dry from Citadel. This is going to be for the sand. I'm going to start bringing in those browns into the sand. I did dry brush a little bit of the reds into the sand because I don't want the sand to be just stark brown. I want it to have that continuity, like it's broken down from the Mars rock, if you will, over time. But I also want it to have more of a brown influence so that it's not just one blob of brick and red and orange colors. There's got to be some delineation. So now I'm going to reach for Mammoth Bark. It's an even lighter brown. I really like this color for highlighting browns. Don't do a ton of dry brushing unless it's on scenery and textured bases, but this will really help kind of sell that brown look under those red tones. We'll do some pigmenting later, don't worry, but this will really start to turn it brown as opposed to just pure red. And here you can see it. You can see there's a nice brown layer with a popping highlight on that sand, but a nice red color to the base. Now I'm just going to show you how I attach my miniatures to my resin bases. I pre-drilled this hole when I was assembling the miniature, because I like to pin miniatures depending on what I'm doing. And I'm just going to I'm going to use a piece of crap old pair of pliers. Don't use your hobby nips for this. Use an old crappy piece of nips. These were like jeweler's nips that a girlfriend from like 100 years ago left at my house when we broke up. Cut it short and test fit, insert the miniature into that pre-drilled hole that you made. Make sure everything lines up good. You don't have to re-drill the hole. I'm reaching for some super glue. I like Gorilla Glue gel. You can use whatever works for you, but it's got to be super glue. Can't be plastic glue. So I put a little bit on the post. I put a little bit on that rock detail because I want to affix it to the base as well, but the post should hold the miniature into the base. That post is about 1/4 inch, maybe a little less, but you want enough grip to hold the miniature on the base. So there it is. It looks good as is now, but I'm taking it another step. I'm reaching for some dry pigments. So I got VMS dry pigments here. I've got Burnt Armor, and then I've got Secret Weapons Rust Orange. This VMS stuff, it's from a European company. I get it from Michigan Toy Soldier. It's Burnt Armor. It's kind of on the red-brown side. It's a 0 grade. All that means is it's super fine. It's like talcum powder fine. So if I were to mix this into a paste, it wouldn't have very much texture. Then Secret Weapon Rust Orange. It's a killer color. It's very orange, but it's got a lot of brick influence to it. This doesn't really say exactly how fine it is, but it's about the same consistency as the VMS stuff. Now, I'm using my Junker brush. A lot of you are going to laugh because it's a Winsor Newton size too. I don't like my Winsors. I prefer my Bombwicks and my Game Envy brushes. So I got to put these to use somehow. The key here is I just dab. I kind of stab into the pigment, but I don't want it to be clumped up, so I'm knocking a little bit of it off here. You see me kind of go back and forth. I'm not trying to dump piles of this stuff, okay? Now I'm going to reach this Burnt Armor into all the cracks and crevices. This is more or less going to be my shadow tone, my undertone, okay? It's very much like painting in this situation, but we're giving it that dusty, earthy feel. So I'm going to jab it into all these cracks and crevices. I'm going to kind of work it in there. It's going to lay on there really nice, look really cool as is, but it can get away from you really quickly. So just be careful with this stuff. You know, you can be jabbing this stuff into the cracks and crevices. Next thing you know, there's a bunch of it pouring out at you. So take your time, get your feel for it, practice with it on maybe a scrap mini or something, and just work with it. You'll see what happens, okay? This stuff's great for weathering bases like this. I want it to have that kind of chalky, weird texture that you would think of in a Martian planet. So work it into all the cracks and crevices, and then we'll talk about getting some shadows here. Under the miniature, it's all bright orange right now. Remember I was talking about that shadow? There's still a little bit of that ink showing through, which is kind of giving me a roadmap for where I'm going to work in this pigment. So I'm stabbing, but I'm also kind of sweeping the bristles onto the rock itself because I don't want to pile up the pigment. I want to kind of rub it in, work it in, if you will. If you do that kind of sweeping motion with your brush, then it'll kind of work it into the piece without making it too dark, too extreme. You're still going to see some of that red shine through. And I'm going to get it through this little detail here. I realized that I completely forgot to model anything around that gap in the miniature and the base, so I'll deal with that later. Make sure you clean off your brush. Don't wet it. Please do not wet it, but make sure you clean off as much as you can. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to kind of just like brush off the edges, clean off the edges, bring those highlights back, remove any pigment from those edges. So you can see it's looking really good right now. Screw that, we're going to bring up those highlights now. So I'm going to reach for that rust orange from Secret Weapon, and I'm only going to focus on where the highlights of the orange are. And I'm just going to dab it onto those very edges, okay? You can blend these pigments once they're on the base. So you'll see me kind of dabbing, stabbing, and rubbing, and it just sounds so dirty, doesn't it? But work those pigments together. They'll blend, okay? And then over time, you'll get a feel for it, but it's not too difficult. People are intimidated by dry pigments. I just love them. I also worked a little bit into the miniature, but the focus isn't what I've done with the miniature, so it's only on the base. You can do what you want with the miniature. And I've kind of blended things, I've kind of worked things around here, and it's looking good. I'm pretty happy with where it's at right now. You can keep going back and forth, mashing different tones in there. You can wipe the base, you can do all sorts of things, but if you're happy with it, you find a good medium, leave it. Now I'm going back to the Mammoth Bark, and I'm just going to hit the peaks of that sand again because I've worked that pigment in there and I've lost my highlights. I went a little overboard. The paint is actually going to mix with that brown pigment that I put on there, and I'm okay with that. I don't want the highlights to be super intense. It's supposed to be a dark, kind of red, alien world, if you will, so it's okay. Of course, you always got to paint the rim on your base once you're done with it. I'm choosing black. I think black works with this color scheme. Everybody knows how to paint the rim of a base, so I just speed it up here. We don't need to worry about that. Pick a color that's suitable for your art. It's looking pretty good. I'm happy with where it's at. You can see the pigment on the cloak, on the feet of the miniature, etc. But I've got to keep it going. I've got to make this thing look good. I worked hard on that miniature, so there's this gap right below that last shelf. I'm going to reach for some grass tufts from the best grass tufts on the planet, Shadow's Edge Miniatures. These things are insane. They are self-adhesive, and when he says they are self-adhesive, they literally are self-adhesive. I have a video on it from my Twitch stream. I'll show it to you guys. He also makes some beautiful foliage, these awesome autumn leaves. They're amazing. They're super affordable. I've got a discount code. I'll put it below. You see all these different variants. He's got all kinds. I'm going to go with this 6mm Harvest. It's actually got like walnuts in it, so it looks rocky, like it's growing from rocks. I'm going to grab an appropriate size for this weird bare spot on this base here. This one looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and pluck that off the sheet here. Now be careful, once you stick these, you're committed. You don't need any glue whatsoever. You're committed. But I also want to point out that I've already sealed this miniature. I've sealed the base and the miniature now, like as a whole unit. I've glossed it, I've dull coated it. I do that before I put the grass tufts on there. I think it's obvious, but for those of you who don't realize it, if you clear coat with tufts on it, your tufts are going to get all clumpy and weird, and it's going to look like crap. So make sure you clear coat before you add tufts. Tufts are the last step. And just press it on with your hobby tweezers here. If you have any errant fibers, put them back in place. But once you stick that bad boy on there, it's done. You're committed. I'm going to find a couple of other spots. I don't want to overdo it. I'm not trying to sell like a prairie land or anything, but I'm trying to make it look like some weeds are growing out of cracks and crevassiers here and there. So I had like 2 or 3 more here. I'm not trying to overdo it. With a 40mm base, I've got plenty of real estate to work with, and I'm going to use it to my advantage. There's a big open spot right here. I don't like that big open spot, so I'm going to pop a tiny little tuft on there. These things are super sticky. If you stick it down, I've said it a couple of times already, you're committed. You do have a little bit of working time to kind of like push it around. It's kind of gooey. But if you try to pull it off, you're screwed. It's bad. Remember I said I was going to address that gap that I completely forgot to hobby any type of detail around. I'm just going to pop a tuft there. Now you can't see that gap. It's that simple. No glue, no nothing. Just stick it in, and it's in place forever. So there he is. I'm going to do a little bit more dry pigment work on the miniature itself. His feet are kind of light. The cloak ended up kind of backing off the pigment influence when I clear coated it. You can kind of see it here. So I'm going to do a little more pigment work on the miniature, but that really doesn't have anything to do with the video. I wanted to focus on the base, working up the base, and I'm really happy with this base. I hope that helps you guys. I hope this video is beneficial for you. As always, I want to tell you guys about my Twitch stream. I stream 3 nights a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. I also have a Patreon. At this point, I'd like to give a shout out to each of my patrons. You guys literally help me continue to do this full time. I can't thank you guys enough. I'll have a link to my Twitch stream as well as my Patreon down below. You guys, it means the world that you've come and check out any of my content. It means the world to me, really it does. I love doing this stuff, and I really appreciate you guys supporting me, even if it's just by hitting the subscribe button here on YouTube. It's free, but trust me, it really helps me. So thank you so much for taking the time to check out my stuff. Share it with your friends if you got any value out of it, and come over to the Twitch stream. Use it as your time to ask me any questions you want, anything hobby related. Since we're in the middle of the whole corona pandemic, unfortunately, I wasn't able to teach my classes at Adepticon. I'm a little worried about Gen Con, but I am supposed to be teaching at Gen Con, StellaCon in Michigan, ATC down in Tennessee, and Warfare Weekend in St. Louis. That's kind of my schedule for the year, so I'll see you guys on the next video. It's going to be a minute. I'm currently renovating the studio, so it's going to be 2 weeks between videos right now, but thank you so much for being there, watching these videos, and hanging out with me. I'll see you next time.